Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Osteoporosis Canada's webinar on emergency preparedness. Before we begin the webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and Marcom at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your webinar host. This webinar will provide general information. It is not intended as individualized health advice. If you have questions, please consult your healthcare provider. Now, we would love to hear from you during the webinar. So if you have questions, just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can within the time available. Osteoporosis Canada is the only national organization serving individuals affected by osteoporosis, working to educate, empower, and support individuals and communities on bone and muscle health and in the risk reduction and treatment of osteoporosis. We look to the best experts to inform our care guidelines for patients and care providers. Our scientific advisory council is made up of experts from across the country in osteoporosis and bone metabolism and is a volunteer membership. Our Osteoporosis Canada provides medically accurate information to patients, healthcare providers, and the public. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Sarah Rydahl. Sarah Rydahl has over 25 years of dedicated experience in healthcare and is a dynamic leader on enhancing patient care through strategic access management and transactional efficiency. Her journey has been shaped by a commitment to improving healthcare delivery systems, streamlining processes, and optimizing resources to ensure optimal patient outcomes. Sarah works alongside internal and external partners in the community to establish clear pathways for seamless transitions in healthcare from hospital to post-acute care and the community. Sarah is a registered physiotherapist with a master's in health administration from Telfer School of Management and a research master's from Queen's University in rehabilitation with a background of published articles in the areas of geriatrics and fall prevention. Her mission is to drive innovation and excellence in healthcare by making meaningful impact on the lives of individuals and communities served. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah. Welcome, Sarah.
Well, thank you very much, Tracie, for having me here today. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. And we're going to get started. So good day, everyone. And thank you so much, Osteoporosis Canada, for having me here to speak on this important and relevant topic. Given the wildfires in BC, the floods in Manitoba and Ottawa, as well as the crowds that we're seeing in Ontario and BC with FIFA, there's a lot of things going on these days, and a lot of things that we need to prepare and plan for as well. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, this is the agenda slide here. So we're going to go over a little bit of the background. We're going to talk about types of disasters that can exist. So floods, cold, crowds, as I mentioned. Then we'll move on to some tips and tricks for planning ahead for everyone and what you can prepare to alleviate any of those stressors that may come with as an emergency arrives. That fear of the unknown, and just to help make it a little smoother to how you can get out in a pinch if you need to. We're going to also talk about what to do during the emergency and where you can go and how to get there as well, and how you can prepare to know where to go there. And we'll move on to talking about there are some items that you need to have in your emergency to go kit and the 5 Ps and some things to consider with those 5 Ps, which is a great acronym for keeping yourself organized and making sure you have those things in your go kit and what you need to prepare for as well. This wouldn't be a talk with Osteoporosis Canada if we didn't talk about the considerations for mobility and fragility fractures as we prepare for an emergency and how we may get out if there is an emergency. And then, of course, there are things that we need to consider after the emergency and items that we may wish to consider in our planning and our 5 Ps so that we can move forward after the emergency for long-term planning and recovery as well. Okay, so some background. Tracie mentioned that I have a background in healthcare and I'm a registered physiotherapist. I'm also a manager of access and flow at a downtown hospital. And so for those who don't know what that means for access and flow, essentially it's the air traffic controller for the hospital. So managing all the comings and goings of when a patient needs a bed for surgery or repatriation if they fall overseas or have an injury while they're traveling, as well as those traditional patients who come in through emergency department. And in the context of this talk, it would be responsible for creating a bed capacity in the event of an external disaster to the hospital. I also oversee the discharge planning and get patient services for discharges when they go home in the context that supports all types of patients and disabilities and their medical needs. In this past spring, I participated in the Operation Red Card, which was a citywide initiative in Ontario where we had 31 participating organizations in an emergency preparedness exercise as we plan ahead for the FIFA World Cup that was coming as well. It was a great event. And also, again, in terms of planning, I oversee the after hours managers on site at the hospital here. So when an emergency happens, we do a lot of planning just to see and how we can prepare in event that a code does occur or a natural disaster. So for the context of this talk, there are disasters can have a classification of natural as well as human-made, and how we manage those and understand the event and the nature of the disaster. So in terms of the severe weather, we can consider the ice storms that we had in 1998 in New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario. There are health emergencies, which many of us survived with COVID-19 and the pandemics, power failures as a result of downed trees, and blackouts that can occur. Some of you may remember the 2003 blackout that took out Quebec, northeastern United States and Quebec, as well as the transportation hazards. So that can be considered like, for instance, a railway disaster, or the airports where the airplane goes off the runway, and that happened downtown Toronto here a few years ago, or the landing of that infamous plane in the Hudson that Hollywood made the movie about. So there are some items that you may wish to consider for your preparations. As Tracie led in the beginning of this, there are some specific things that you may wish to consider in the context of the emergency that you are dealing with. So you want to think of specific items with respect to the heat or cold events, some jacket that you may require, or foul weather gear. If you live on a well, or what would happen if water access was altered or you were unable to access clean drinking water. Other things to consider in your preparations are safe spaces in the community, so where you can go to be treated or where you can seek refuge, and having knowledge of where that is. And we'll discuss that in this presentation as well. When you think of some windstorms may blow down trees, that happens in some older neighborhoods, as well as with tornadoes and hurricanes that come through as well. And when those hydro lines are down, how you will access power for some of those essential equipment that you have as well. For the backup power, looking where your charging stations are, knowing that you have a backup battery as well. And then in the terms of larger events like concerts that we may have, or events in the community, for instance, FIFA that we just had at Canada, we've now finished our FIFA, and what you can do and plan, best prepare for what you need to let go and what you can bring with you safely as well. And then we'll also talk about leaving your home. So how to make sure that you have access to leave the home, as well as the route is clear and clean of clutter. So we'll talk about a bit more about that in this context here. So in terms of preparing for, everyone has a role for getting ready for the disaster or an emergency that may happen. And an emergency can happen at any time or anywhere, and making sure that you're prepared and planning ahead to ensure that you have all the essential items that you need for before, during, and after the emergency. This part can also give you peace of mind, but also can help make a quick exit if you need to for any context. Again, it's important to make sure you listen to your local city's emergency preparedness guides, seeing what they recommend that you get ready, as well as listening to whether you're going to stay in place or shelter in place or seek an evacuation plan as well. Okay. So in the context of this slide, we're talking about an ounce of prevention and advanced planning can certainly help with alleviating some of the stress, but also making sure that you have some of those items with you that are essential and you don't forget any essential items. So again, looking at what's in your go bag or your emergency bag, as some people call it, planning ahead for when and if you need to make the decision to leave your home, what specifics that you need in your home, and the surroundings to consider the context of the emergency that you're in, what you need to plan to bring with you as well. And then looking at the evacuation plan and the support network. So working with your community and everyone in your community to support one another, listening to your local authorities of how you will evacuate and the places and safe places to go once you are evacuating. And then in terms of the support network, there are individuals in your own personal support network, but also you want to think about the larger support network in terms of your local authorities and your community paramedicine programs as well. So a good rule of thumb is to consider the 5 Ps. The emergency response plan 5P framework is a great way for organizations and families to organize themselves and their plans in the context of what they're taking in that personal journey when they do seek and they are looking for emergency preparedness as well. And what you need to consider, especially when you have a mobility issue or a fragility fracture to consider, and what you need to consider packing. So what goes in that go kit or that go bag? And depending on the context and the situation, as I mentioned before, whether it's hot or cold, and whether you'll need some of those specific things for your environment. The 5 Ps are also helpful for in the moment of what you may require, but also for what comes after the disaster. So you're able to grow and move forward in your recovery plan and into the recovery phase afterwards to make sure that you have some of those information that you need in terms of insurance and moving forward as well. Okay, so the first of the 5 Ps is people. So each person, you want to make sure that each person in your family has all their personal supplies with them. So a minimum of 72 hours. You want to make sure that your family and your pets are your first priority, making sure everybody is safe, making sure they're all accounted for in the house or the apartment that you're in. And that does include your pets and furry friends as well, because they will rely heavily on you for safety and dependency as well. So making sure you know where your pet carrier is, where the leash is located near the front exit, as well as all the considerations for your food, water, and shelter for those individuals as well. When you're looking at P, the second P is paper, and that stands for means for your IDs. So your SIN card, your birth certificate, your driver's license, the passports, your insurance policies, your essential contacts and vital documents that you will need for now and for rebuilding your life later. That may include the deed to the house that you own as well. And you want to make sure that it's stored in a watertight folder and as well as stored in a digital source as well. You want to consider your prescriptions that you have, as well as the pharmacy. And some recommend an emergency financial first aid kit, which you can also get some resources on as well. Okay. The next one is the prescriptions. So for prescriptions, many recommend for safety that you want to have at least 72 hours to 1 week worth of medication as you prepare. You also want to consider other essential prescriptions, which can be eyeglasses, hearing aid, critical medical supplies. Another part of the prescription that I've included in this area is a pain relief kit, first aid kit, and over-the-counter medications are things you may wish to consider. Then we move on to the plastics. So that's the credit cards, the debit cards, again, your driver's license, and making sure you have a backup on a digital copy, but as well as a photocopy of them, and you keep those in your dry bag with your papers as well. And then the next one is the photos. So those can be those memorabilia that you have, the irreplaceable photos. But they can also be, it's also important to remember that you have a photo of each member of your family and their contact information, as well as a picture of your pet too, in case you get separated, and the ownership of that pet. Also, make sure you have a photocopy of all of those. And some people recommend if you have those essential valuables or irreplaceable photos, like that first drawing your kid ever did, or your wedding album, make sure that is also in a storage box or something that you can grab to go as well. Again, you want to recommend that you spend a weekend or something looking at digitizing some of those photos that you can't just live without, and anything that might be cherished that you can't part with as well. Given that context, though, you want to make sure that it's quite a big list here with those 5 Ps, but you want to make sure that you're able to move with that all of the go bag as well. So we'll move on to the next. So as you want to pre-pack for now, but you also want to make sure that when you pre-pack, you're also planning for and getting a head start on what you may need after the emergency as well. And for those that can't pack, you can pack some things immediately and keeping them there, but there are some things that you may not be always able to pack in your go bag, for instance, your driver's license or what have you. So make a checklist to remind yourself during the emergency of those last minute items that you may need to grab. It would be helpful to have it written down because during an emergency, you may not remember all of those items. So it's always good to have that reference to go back and check up on it. All right. And when you pack your go bag, it's always good to practice again to make sure that you can move it easily and it doesn't require, for instance, a forklift of all the memorabilia to move around. There's a lot of things to consider in the context of the emergency, and you want to make sure that you think about the nature of the emergency that you're in and that you have all the items. So again, making sure that you have your winter coat if it's during the winter and there's a snowstorm. The other good piece of reminder is for those emergency kits to make sure that you update them regularly. Look at them and to make sure none of the medication is expired. And if you have food or anything that could expire in that kit, it's always good to review and make sure that it's still in good working condition. All right. So the next is we're moving into the during the emergency part of the discussion. So looking at those escape paths or shelter in place, what is your evacuation plan? Mobility specific plans, as well as accessibility and stairs we'll talk about. Another piece to consider is the equipment considerations, as well as a little bit more of a discussion on your support network. Okay. So your local authority, and it's important to remember to listen to your local authority about whether your instructions are to shelter in place or leave and evacuate your home. And it's a decision to leave and evacuate your home that you need to consider quite a few things in the context of the emergency that you're leaving. So you may get direction from your local authority, and it's important to listen and keep an open line of communication. So looking at the news, the radio, using your telephone, or a reliable media source to make sure that you're getting the most accurate and up-to-date information. And your city or town that you're in may invoke their emergency response plan. So ahead of time, it's always a good idea to review the emergency response plan and the context of what that looks like. So looking a little more closely at evacuating your home, it's important to consider several ways that you can leave your home, because it may be that the front door of your house may not be accessible in the context of the emergency that you're in. So it's always good to have several ways that you can leave your home, and you cannot assume that your usual route will be available to you at the time of the emergency. And then it's always great to practice what that looks like with your family or your support network that's going to be assisting you if you've got some mobility issues as well. Now moving along to shelter in place. Again, there's the consideration of the food and the water as well to consider for you, your family, as well as your pets to ensure that you have all the right food and shelter, food and water available to you. Also, your medication again, making sure in the context of both of these, they have 72 hours to 1 week's worth of supply that you can safely manage for the time until safety arrives. All right. So moving on to the evacuation plan, it's important to stay informed, as I mentioned. So making sure that you listen to your local authorities, whether that's through the media or social media, that's a reliable source, telephone, newspaper, radio, and then follow all the directions that your local authority is informing you what to do. Look at that go bag. So make sure you've got those last minute checklist items as well added. So that would include your cell phone or your laptop, your backup battery power, as well as your cell phone and medications that you may need as well. Part of that evacuation plan is also letting somebody in your support network know where you will be found once you leave your house. So some areas, for instance, the City of Toronto has community partners on well-being index, so areas that you can go to find safety, and these are centers that are able to receive large volumes of individual and safety situations as well. And making sure that you're constantly communicating with your support network to know how to meet up afterwards if you get separated. All right. In the context of the Osteoporosis Canada and as a physiotherapist, it's important to consider your mobility specific plans or specific plans for mobility impairments. And that may include fall prevention strategies as a safe method for navigating stairs, and for those who are unable to do stairs, or the equipment considerations when power is not available, or the elevators in your apartment building. And then in my background and context of discharge planning, some individuals have local community paramedic programs and support that for patients that are registered. And you can register with your local responders and fire department as someone who may require assistance in the home when needing to exit, particularly those who have significant mobility impairments or are bedbound. An important planning ahead with these local authorities to know who you can contact for a safe exit during an emergency. All right. So creating accessible paths is similar to the fall prevention techniques, and some of you may have listened to the OC Unbreakable podcast we did in the spring, Finding Balance, and there are some good strategies in there for making sure that you have hazards removed for accessible paths and fall prevention. Because when you're in a hurry, you may not be paying full attention to what's underfoot. That could cause further injury as you're trying to seek help. So making sure that you clear the path of clutter. So removing hazards on your way to the exits. And remember that we just talked about that you may have plan for multiple exits. So making sure that you've got a clear path for those multiple exits. Another piece that we talked about in the podcast in the spring is looking at that lighting. So making sure that you have good lighting to see in the dark as well, so that you don't trip over anything as well. And then removing those tripping hazards and throw rugs and carpets, and making sure if you do have carpets that they have the non-slip underneath so it doesn't cause you to slip and fall and have a fracture. Making sure you have your emergency kit near your front door or your exit or in a central accessible location that you can get it, so should you need to make an alternate exit plan. Looking at those 5 Ps with the checklist for the last, and making sure you've got those last minute items on your checklist. And again, reviewing that regularly for what is needed and updating as you need to if any medication has become expired or any food is expired as well. And have those items that you need for a fast exit near the door. So in the context of cold weather, that would be coat and proper footwear, making sure you have that leash or pet carrier available should you need to leave. And having all of this ready will be able to give you some peace of mind that you can get out should you need to in a hurry. In the context of mobility impairments, it's important to have a discussion about stairwell procedures. So some stairwells or some condos and apartments have designated areas of refuge for stairwells. So you can check with your landlord to see what their specific procedures are in the event of an emergency. Some apartments also highly recommend not using the elevators should there be an issue with the power as well. So going to those areas of refuge and waiting for local authorities to help with you getting down those stairs or an evacuation chair. And with respect to those, it's always helpful to practice with them as well with your local authority or with your landlord and do regular practices. I know at the hospital, we do regular code green and code orange evacuation procedures and practices to make sure that everybody's aware of what they're supposed to do at a particular time so as not to have any confusion and delay when we're escaping from an emergency as well. All right. So for equipment, there are a few things you wish to consider. So in terms of the equipment, you want to get some laminated cards or instructions on how that equipment will work, how to disconnect the equipment, as well as manual overrides. For instance, many power wheelchairs and scooters, when they lose power and you don't have access to a backup battery or backup power, there is a manual override option. So knowing how to do that and having a strong person who is able to override the power wheelchair into manual mode so that you can move as well. Knowing how to disconnect your machine to move on from the battery and the backup power, how your oxygen works, and disconnecting that as well as your CPAP machines as well. And then when you're thinking about your go bag and your emergency kit, you want to think about the backup battery. So how the CPAP backup battery works. Power wheelchairs have backup batteries. Some have the context to be able to use regular batteries, but those are not long lasting. So they won't last as long, and you have to really check with your manufacturer about whether that's even possible. Then when you think about your wheelchair or your rollator walker as well, some of them, older ones now had air tires. A lot of them have moved to now the solid rubber so that you don't have to continuously patch those tires. But if you still have one that's filled with air, you want to think about having a patch kit. So if you are escaping in an area that has a lot of debris on the ground, you don't get a flat tire, which can make the chair or wheelchair or walker much harder to move. Again, thinking about that backup battery or the context of a manual wheelchair where you don't have to rely on any of those if the seating is appropriate for you. And then I did put another piece about heavy gloves as well, because when you're pushing the wheelchair and going through debris or pushing the walker, the wheels may pick up some of the debris on the ground, which could be damaging to your hands. So you want to make sure that you have some heavy gloves to protect you from anything that might damage your hands and add undue harm. Okay, the next context is talking about your support network. Whom are you going to help you, and whom are you going to be supporting? You want to, one thing you want to consider is having a primary contact, but also having a secondary or backup contact. So that's somebody that should you not be able to get a hold of the primary, there is a backup. So the Canadian Red Cross recommends two contacts as a minimum. And then you want to plan for where you will meet up and your location. So where is your meetup location should you get separated? I know sometimes when you're in a large crowd, you or in a mall, you may have a should we get separated? Where are we going to meet up? So it's always good to plan for that. With your support network, you want to make sure you teach them how to disconnect from your backup power and how to change over to manual override. For your equipment, and make sure you have those laminated instructions for your equipment and telling your support network where those instructions remain as well. Again, practicing with your support network, making sure they know how to change the override, making sure they are able to help with the evacuation plan or the escape plan that you've got set up for your house or your apartment or condo as well. And then again, as I mentioned, the meetup location if you get separated, or safe locations in your apartment building so your family knows where they are as well, or your support network. Support network, to be clear, can also include your PSW or your nurse, that is, as well as your local emergency and first responders that you may be registered with as well. All right. We're going to move into after the emergency and some things you would have planned for as we move into the next part of our conversation. So, preparing for after the emergency and your long-term recovery and things you may want to consider. So, your support network after the emergency and you've made it to your safe place, making sure you contact them. So connect with your family, connect with your friends, making sure that they're okay, but also checking in to let them know that you're okay as well. You may also need to connect with your employer or your child's school to let them know that you may be missing something or missing work or missing school and the context of why. Looking at any appointments and connecting with any appointments that you may miss in the next little bit, as well as making sure with your go bag in the papers section, we talked about the insurance and making sure you have all that with you so that you can prepare and plan. Take stock of what's happened and what you need to connect with the insurance company. Next piece is moving to food, clothing, and shelter. So once you've sheltered and you found your safe place, making sure you have food, clothing, and shelter. Now moving further along as well, not just for those first 72 hours to 1 week. And of course, immediate needs. So looking to see if you need any additional help or you've gotten injured along the way as well. That may need attention. So some items to consider for fragility fractures when you're in the context of an emergency preparedness. So again, you want to consider the 5 Ps. You want to look at your prescriptions, making sure you have enough prescriptions for 72 hours to 1 week, as well as making sure that you have all that you need in your go bag and have considered how you're going to get out of your house in an emergency. So you want to make sure that you do those fall prevention techniques, making sure that you've removed all the scatter rugs, cleaned up all the hallways, made sure the exits are clear. And then in the context of considering your equipment too. So making sure you got the backup power, everything's in good working condition. And then making sure that you know, excuse me, making sure that you know how and your family and friends are able to support you with those mobility issues as well. So that and practicing that. So making sure that you have them over for a tea and practice how you're going to get out of your house when you're not in an emergency so that when you are, you know how you can do that. Some people suggest timing and making sure that you know how long that's going to take you. So then in the context of an emergency, you have an understanding of what the time frame is to get out of your house in the emergency as well. And so these are some of the references that you can look at. Ontario.ca and Canada.ca have emergency preparedness guides for people with disabilities, as does Red Cross Canada. And for those who are in Toronto, there is a Toronto.ca emergency preparedness as well. I'll turn it back over to Tracie.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was great. And, if you are in Ontario today or Toronto, we are experiencing, actually, we received a yellow alert for thunderstorms and tornadoes. So, with all the information you shared, and I think for everyone on, it is a lot to think about. There's a lot you think you would be ready to go with, but then there are a lot of things you brought up I don't think we may consider. So being prepared in advance, I think, is really important. We do have time for a few questions. And so there is a question, and I know it's happened, what to do if in a very large area you've got a long blackout and it's particularly during very hot weather. How would you manage if you had medications that needed to be stored in a refrigerator, that need to be cold? What should somebody do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that you want to consider again is those 5 Ps. So it's about the planning piece, right? So for the planning piece for your medication, you've got that 72 hours to 1 week worth of medication that you're planning for. So that's the context of that. But also making sure when you're planning that you've planned for how are you going to take care of that medication should it if it needs power. So is it looking at if you have backup power for your generator for your house? Some people have that luxury of having that access to that. And for those who don't have access to that, some look at using cooler or an ice and what have you to maintain it being cooled. I would recommend connecting with your pharmacist. That's your best source of truth for how to manage your medication safely and where you would be able to store it safely.
Okay, great. And kind of along the same lines in terms of medication and treatment. And I know that this happened during the pandemic where people did miss doses of their medication, not just for osteoporosis, but for whatever condition that they were dealing with. How does somebody manage that? So if you cannot get to get your medication or your treatment, especially if you have to go to your healthcare provider to have it administered, how should you manage this?
Yeah, another great question. And that's always something that you're concerned about too, because what happens if you miss the fear of the unknown, if you miss the dose, right? If do you have to restart up the whole process or how do you get caught up? And those are great questions that you can again pre-plan when you talk with your family doctor or your pharmacist, and they can help you planning for that, right? They can give you great advice on how to make up for that missed dose or how to pre-plan for that should it be longer than a week and you don't have your medication with you. Great question.
That's great. Now, this question actually came up in an earlier webinar we did about modifying activities in sport.
Hmm.
So if you're packing your to-go bag, and you did mention this, some people who've had vertebral fractures may not be able to lift as much or have a traditional backpack or
Yeah.
whatever that may look like. So I think you have to consider what you're putting in this to-go bag to make sure you can safely lift it upstairs or go downstairs, or how to get it in and out of a vehicle, etc. What
Hmm.
should people pack so that they can safely be able to lift and carry it for whatever amount of time that they may need?
Yeah. So again, it's considering the context of the emergency that you're in, but again, it's those essential items. So looking at the 5 Ps again, so planning for beforehand, during, and afterwards. And what really is, when you think of those, the photos and the memorabilia, those things, how can you make it lighter for yourself? So this is why I was talking about making sure that you get things on a hard drive or moving it to a digital platform like a cloud so that you can access it later and you don't have to carry that whole entire wedding album with you. So looking at some ways that you can modify. Also looking at the bag itself. A lot of people historically use backpacks, but there are other options now, and there are great options available too for those rolling suitcases. And they made some great strides with those for making them a little bit more user friendly for those who can't lift.
Great. Now this question is more probably for us. So somebody just wrote that they work at a senior center and
Yes.
they're asking if we have like a document that we could share with us. That is a great idea. Currently, we do not, but I think we're going to look into it. So please continue to check the Osteoporosis Canada website, and we'll see about putting something together that is handy that you can actually check. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you very much for that. And our last question is actually, sorry, two questions. We talked about pets. So for someone who has pets, aside from food, and the carrier. Is there anything else that people should consider in terms of the type of pets? People have all kinds of pets. Um,
Yes,
yeah,
very true. Yeah, people have all types of pet. People have all sorts of affinities for the various types of pets. So things you want to consider, yeah, for sure you want to consider the food. Something that is a good idea is those travel or the collapsible bowls, so it's easier to carry. The leash, obviously, for the context of bringing those animals along as well, and making sure that you have a carrier if it's appropriate for that animal, especially. And then I guess it's given the context of what type of animal it is. So connecting with the pet stores as well to see, because some pets can be rather large and exotic, but I'm not sure about that, but somebody may have an affinity for them.
there we go. That's great. And then our last question is, if people are experiencing a high stress situation, a high stress emergency, and they are at risk for something like a heart attack or a stroke, how can they help manage that stress to safely get to where they need to go, where there is medical care available?
Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about this, I guess, in the podcast about the falls too, was the preparedness and the breathing techniques that you can do in terms of managing your stress. So I would say you'd need to rely heavily on those in terms of managing and knowing that you've done a lot of preparedness in advance too, so that you've got the emergency go bag prepared and just it's just those last minute items that you need to get and making sure you write that down because in an emergency you will not remember those 5 items. You'd be lucky if you remember 3. So writing them down is very helpful.
No, that's excellent. Sarah, thank you so much. This is all really valuable information and clearly something that we need more frequently. I'm just going to share my screen here. So, as Sarah mentioned, she did do a podcast for us. It is on finding balance, fall prevention strategies. So, it's on the Osteoporosis Canada website, but it's also on iTunes and other podcast providers. So, you can listen very easily there. There's other information on the website. We are recording this webinar, and so it's going to be available on the OC Replay webpage, just like our previous webinars on GLP-1 medications and bone health. We, of course, have our recipes and the nutrient calculators, so I encourage you to visit osteoporosis.ca. Thank you to Sarah for all the information that she shared and for answering our questions. We've got 2 upcoming webinars. So we have a cooking demo next Wednesday focused on protein, and it's beef kebabs with quinoa tabbouleh and Emily Richards. And in September, we have a webinar on breast cancer and bone health, and that will be with Dr. Carol Townsley. And both of these you can register. They're on the Osteoporosis Canada website. So you can just go to the event calendar and put your information in. And lastly, if you subscribe, we're on social media. You can get all kinds of tools and resources on the Osteoporosis Canada website. We thank Sarah Rydahl. We thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and be well. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.